So, hello and welcome to Long COVID Foundation podcast. This is the channel where we share educational information on long COVID to help you understand your symptoms better. Today, we have a talk with Sanogenetics based in Cambridge, UK. So, Sanogenetics was founded in 2017 by three students of Genomics: Charlotte Guzzo, Patrick Short, and William Jones. It helps accelerate precision medicine research by finding people who wish to contribute to studies and helping them to do so effortlessly and on their terms. Its platform adopts innovations widespread in other sectors, such as user-friendly digital interfaces, dynamic individualized feedback, and an emphasis on privacy, packed as an end-to-end service that lets people power global studies from their own homes. So we speak today with Dr. Patrick Short, who is the CEO of Sanogenetics. So Patrick is experienced in genomics research with a focus on large-scale genome sequencing projects and rare disorders, previously at the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute and the University of Cambridge. So Dr. Patrick Short, thank you very much for joining us today. And it's very nice to have you on our channel.
It's my pleasure, Valentina. Thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. So before we go into your presentation, I know you have something to share. Could you please share a little information on how you came across this idea to establish Sanogenetics and how it was born?
Yeah, very happy to. So I think you gave a really great introduction. I, as you mentioned, started the company with my co-founders in 2017. Was really born out of experiencing a problem from two perspectives. One, as researchers, we saw how difficult it was to actually run research studies. Exactly as you described, precision medicine studies take a really long time. They're incredibly expensive, and that translates to new treatments taking on average 10 or 15 years and multiple billions of dollars to get to patients. And there are about 7,000 genetic diseases that we know of, and only a small fraction of those actually have a treatment. So we could see that there was this enormous problem that there really wasn't a solution in sight. And then the second aspect of that is actually, as a person with a genetic disease or as a research participant, taking part in research is often not very rewarding. You don't know what's happened to your sample. You don't get any information back. You don't get notified about new opportunities to take part in research that might be relevant to you. And this is not necessarily the fault of the researchers. It's the researchers are often working very hard behind the scenes, but there's just a lack of infrastructure and a disconnect that means research is very pen and paper. It's very analog. Taking part is not really utilizing all the technology that we have. So we felt like really there was a solution actually to both sides of the same coin. If we could make it simpler, easier for participants to take part and make it effortless and make it really valuable so participants get something back, then that in turn actually helps the researchers as well. The cost of doing research goes down, we can speed up, and ultimately there's a very powerful virtuous cycle here.
Thank you so much. That's really very technologically needed platform, whatever you mentioned about helping people to enroll on studies and make the research go faster. I think this is something that we definitely are missing in long COVID. 2 years into pandemic, and we still don't know what the disease is, and we definitely would need more from you on that subject. I will let you share your slides so that we know a little bit more about them.
Great. Yeah, and thank you so much for the introduction. I'm just going to jump right into it. I think you gave a really good overview. When we started this study called the Genetics of Long COVID, or GOLD for short, there were at the time a number of open questions, and unfortunately many of these questions are still unanswered, although we and others really are starting to make much better progress towards answering some of them, but it's still very far from complete. So why do some people get long COVID and others don't? Why do some people recover after a period of time or after something like a vaccine, whereas others don't? What is actually the root biological cause? What is the reason that one person would get it and the other doesn't? What's actually happening at a cellular level? or at an organ level that's really driving the symptoms, the very wide array of symptoms that people feel. And how can we actually treat people affected by long COVID? This is, of course, one of the most important questions to answer. If we didn't know the cause, but we knew how to treat it, we'd probably be happier than if we knew the cause, but didn't know how to treat it. And what are the long-term effects? This is a question that I think we're going to continue to be asking for many years. And obviously the list goes on. There are questions that are important to individuals personally and to families. There are also scientifically interested questions. When we started the project, one of the things that we realized was that there was a lot of really interesting and exciting and important work being done in understanding severe COVID based on hospitalization. So patients who are hospitalized and then end up on a ventilator or other very severe outcome. However, there was comparatively very little work being done on groups of people who were severe but had not been hospitalized, or had potentially been hospitalized but then gone back home and gone on to develop long COVID and really significant severe symptoms. And it was this group that we felt like there was a lot more attention that needed to be paid to this growing epidemic. And also it was very well suited to our platform, which is online and at home first. So we decided to see what we could do here. So the role of genetics in acute COVID has, in the past 2 years, been very closely studied. So there's been a number of very large-scale global consortia that have looked at what role genetics plays and uncovered a number of genetic variants that do significantly increase the risk of contracting a severe COVID infection in the first place, and then ultimately the outcome of critical illness after that infection. This work is starting to be done in long COVID, but it's still a ways behind the work that's been done in hospitalized patients and severe in hospital COVID. Fortunately, many groups around the world are working to catch up, and we're one of those groups, and we're excited to work very collaboratively with other groups like the COVID-19 Human Genetics Consortium and others. This really does need to be a global effort because patients are really affected by this around the world. We need to make sure our studies are representative. And so, as I mentioned before, we worked very closely with Dr. David Strain, who's based at Exeter here in the UK, to launch the Genetics of Long COVID study. And we've got an aim of recruiting more than 3,000 people initially. We'd like to increase that. The more people that we can get involved in the study, really, the more powerful the findings will be. But we saw that some of the early genetic studies in critically ill hospitalized patients started to see signals around 3,000 patients of the earliest genetic markers and started to uncover that signal. So this is really the first milestone for us. And I'll touch on this in a moment, but we also have a commitment to enroll a representative population. So genetic studies are historically extremely Eurocentric and have the vast majority of participants being of European descent. And we've made a specific commitment in this project to ensure that we've got a population that's representative of the UK, because if we don't do this, then the findings won't necessarily translate to the world that we live in. And just to go into that in a little bit more detail, as I mentioned before, more than 80% of participants in genetic studies are of European ancestry, despite, of course, this only being about 10% of the world population. And it's really important that we extend these discoveries to cover as broad a range of people as possible, because really the potential outcome of this is that we understand why genetics influences long COVID. And if we don't recruit a representative population, we only understand this within a very narrow subset of the population. And there's a real risk that these findings don't generalize to everyone. So there is an urgent need, not just in this study, but in genetics and in medical research more generally, to improve representativeness of these studies and ensure that people, no matter what their ancestry is, they feel comfortable and willing to take part in these studies. So just a little bit more about how our platform works. It's a saliva-based test. It's non-invasive, so it takes about 5 minutes to complete, and the instructions are in the kit and really simple. And as I mentioned at the beginning, participants don't have to leave home to take part. It's all either digital, filling out information about yourself and your symptoms, or a kit that's saliva-based that you can send back really easily through the Royal Mail in the UK. And the URL for the study, if you'd like to take a look and read more, is on the slides here. So, and just a little bit more about us as a company, we've built the platform from the outset to be private by design. And so when back in 2017, we were starting the company, there was, and there still is today to some extent, a choice that participants have to make whether they take part in research and or have full control over their own potentially sensitive health information. And we felt like this shouldn't have to be a choice. People should be able to take part in medical research that's potentially beneficial to them or their family members, and could help advance the field as a whole without having to be concerned about whether their data was being shared in a way that they'd like. So we built the platform with this principle in mind from the beginning. Participants across all of our research studies have full control over their data and can choose ultimately whether you'd like to take part in any one particular research study. And the platform is GDPR and HIPAA compliant, and we've also recently received an ISO 27001 certification, which is a internationally recognized standard for information security. So just to recap, you can visit our website at any time if you just want to learn more about the company or get in touch with us. There's a little orange rectangle on the side you can click on and chat live with our team at any time if you have any questions about the study, about the company more generally, or just to say hello. So thanks very much, and thank you, Valentina, for the opportunity to talk about the GOLD study. And we're really hopeful that we can, together with the rest of the community, make some kind of impact here that results in positive impact on patients.
Thank you so much. So I would like to go a little bit deeper into what you expect from the study, what is current situation where you are now. But before, I think, as non-professional in this area, and most of the people are now learning themselves about the disease itself. So genetics is quite important to drive potentially appropriate treatments. So collection of human DNA contributes to better understanding of variation among people, if am I right? So the translation of that genome into medically useful information might be beneficial, but still seem to be at early stage. So what is your view on that, where we are now with this technology?
Yes, it is. So it's been about 20 years since the first human genome was successfully sequenced. It's been a little bit longer than that. And in that period of time, the big significant thing that's happened is the cost and time it takes to sequence a human genome has come down dramatically. And what we can do with that information and what it tells us has also dramatically improved. Within long COVID and in most diseases, there's a couple of big areas where we expect genetics could have an impact. One is identifying people who are at higher risk from the get-go. So is there something in your genetics or my genetics or somebody else's that means you're simply more likely to catch the virus in the first place, or you're more likely, if you catch the virus, to go on and develop long COVID? And the reason for this could be there's an emerging bit of research around the role of autoantibodies in long COVID, and I'm sure you've discussed this. So this phenomenon of autoantibodies is also present in other autoimmune diseases that are genetically you can have a genetic predisposition to. So it's possible that people who may have a genetic predisposition to certain kinds of autoimmune conditions have essentially an autoimmune-like condition that's been triggered by COVID infection. And a lot of this work is still ongoing and preliminary, but that's one potential application. So why do some people go on to develop it and others? The second is a deeper understanding of the biology in general, and that leads to hopefully therapeutics. So if we take the first example, where suppose there are genetic markers that are identified that point to some kind of autoimmune signature, this tells us something really potentially very important about the biological underpinnings of the disease, and that can help drug developers, therapeutic developers, or other approaches to treatment and maintenance, or treatment and management to actually really treat the root cause. And if you understand that it's caused by autoantibodies in a subset of patients, for example, then you can, and by not just autoantibodies, but a particular gene or set of genes that predisposes to that, then you can be much more targeted with the therapy. So those are two big areas. And the third is once treatments are available, we may be able to tailor treatments more effectively to people based on their genetic backgrounds. And this third one is still likely a ways away because we need to get to therapies in the first place before it's relevant. But that third piece is already happening in many other diseases like cancer, as is probably the furthest along, where now, depending on the genome of your tumor, you'll get a very different treatment regimen that's proposed. So that's where we hope to get with every disease.
So a little bit on that, what you have just said. So are there any examples in clinical implementation where personal genome information was used in order to identify the cause of genetic disease and to suggest relevant therapies?
Yeah, so where it's most commonly used is today's oncology, cancer, and rare diseases. So if we take rare diseases as an example, patients are often diagnosed through what's called a gene panel, where you're testing for a number of genes. So if the child has epilepsy, for example, then you may test for dozens or hundreds of rare genes that are known to cause epilepsy. And then the treatments can be prescribed based on that rare disease. Of course, the challenge here is most rare diseases don't have a treatment. So in many cases, you are able to identify the disease, but not necessarily to treat it. But in some cases, you can. Cancer is another great example where it's now much more common that cancers are being whole genome sequenced, so that every breast cancer is not the same. And I've lost count because every couple of years it's updated, but there are now dozens of different subtypes of breast cancer based on the genome and the transcriptome of those cancers, and different classes of treatment are more or less effective based on which genetic subtype of cancer a patient carries.
In relation to COVID itself, there were papers in early days of pandemic that HLA genes can predict how severe your disease can be, and it was found that 3 times as often in people who are asymptomatic. So this suggests that people with this particular gene have some level of protection from severe COVID. And it was also suggested that this gene directly correlates to the location. So meaning people in north and west of Europe are likely to have this gene, and they are more likely asymptomatic, but still transmit this disease to other populations. So saying that because we also seen some studies that a HLA gene determines immune response. So could you please comment if by today you've seen any commonalities among people with long COVID and that gene?
Yeah, it's a great question. So unfortunately we have not done the analysis yet to look at the first set of genome hits. We really need to get to that 3,000 participant mark before we can start to draw any any conclusions that are that are useful for the community to look into. But this is one of the major hypotheses that the HLA genes are certainly one of the ones that are more likely to be involved, and are also one of the trickiest to analyze, which is one of the challenging parts of these studies. But absolutely, there's also a number of other genes that are in the ACE receptor pathway and in a number of other immune pathways that have been identified through the initial large scale COVID genome-wide association studies that have done in the hospital. So I think it will be interesting to understand where the genetics of long COVID is overlapping with that genetics that's already been done there, and where is it distinct, because that will also tell us a lot about about the long-term prospects, whether it is really how distinct the disease is, and to what extent the genetics correlates with other with other diseases that we already know about and already understand the genetics, because that will then help us to really understand from a more fundamental level what's actually going on and how it might be able to be addressed.
I see. So from your experience so far, so you've started, I think, a couple of years ago looking into long COVID as a company. So how you see that DNA can be related to long COVID?
Yeah, so we started in early 2021 began to collect the initial samples at that point. At this stage, unfortunately, we just have not yet hit the 3,000 person mark to be able to make any useful predictions. However, we're getting very close. There's one thing that is, as I mentioned in the presentation, we set a target to ensure that the study is representative of the UK population, and we're very committed to that. And that's been one of the challenges of the study, is making sure that that we're enrolling participants and reaching that goal, because what many studies do is they tend to focus on finding patients that are most easily reached through the traditional means of patient engagement and research, and we really want to make sure that we're collecting samples from a population that's really representative of the world that we live in. So that's one of the big challenges for us now, and maybe one of the things to ask from the community as well is, we'd really love to hear more from you all about, are there ways in which we could improve the study and make it more engaging for people with long COVID, to ensure that it's as simple and rewarding as possible to take part.
Sure. So another important factor to ask is, we started to see that environmental factors and glyphosate, for example, they do have quite severe impact on gut health, and especially in long COVID. How does this thing can impact changes in genes, and that can cause health issues like in long COVID?
It's a really good question. I have to confess that I haven't read as much of the recent research on the cellular changes that happen post COVID. We've been really trying to dive in and understand the genetics and also the heterogeneity of the disease. So there's such a wide range of different symptoms, and why some people experience brain fog and fatigue, whereas other people don't, and actually experience maybe more kind of chest and lung breathing difficulties. So it's hard to say. I have kept in touch with a lot of the literature that's coming out of a number of the large scale studies in the US. And one of the things that does seem to be really emerging is this role of autoantibodies, and at least a large subset of patients do have really a very clear signature of autoantibodies, and exactly how these are triggered, and whether there's a way in which it can be treated using potentially drugs that are repurposable from other diseases that we already know much more about, that have this similar signature. I think a lot of this work is ongoing, what I'm really excited about. But and unfortunately, the long-term impacts of long COVID as well. I think there's been a lot of important work, I think, on an epidemiological level that's quantifying the scale of the problem, and I think shedding some light onto just how many people are affected by this, and research funding bodies and governments, I hope, are starting to take notice. But what this looks like over the long term is very challenging to predict at this point. And for that reason, my focus and our focus is trying to accelerate treatments and do the groundwork that needs to be done for treatments to get to patients as quickly as possible, because we'd rather not find out what this looks like over a 3, 4, 5, 10-year period. Better to really address the problem now to the extent that we can.
Sure, treatments actually is a very challenging thing indeed, and we just recently held third Long COVID Coalition Congress on thrombosis and coagulation issues, and there were scientists and medical doctors involved discussing various treatment options, starting from simple nutraceutical intervention and going into mechanical interventions like apheresis, which is quite costly and significant procedure, which not necessarily works for everybody. So I think going to the root cause and some kind of classification among patients is really important. And I don't know in terms of genetics involved into that, because I still not quite in the subject itself. I need to look into it a little bit more deeper to understand. But if there is a chance of classifying people based on symptoms they have and DNA predisposition to one or another disease that potentially can be triggered at later stages and most probably by long COVID due to death cells and people getting older faster, maybe this can somehow predict the disease, where it will go to which pathway, and potentially trigger right treatments at early stages rather than later. This is really interesting. I am really looking forward to understand where it goes later. But just in a summary, for people to know how to apply for this study. So this is called GOLD study that you are doing, and eligible participants will receive a free at-home test. So what is the eligibility criteria?
So the eligibility criteria is intentionally very wide. So participants who have had long COVID does not have to be PCR confirmed infection or anything like that. For obvious reasons, early in the pandemic and even now, there's no guarantee that that an infection can necessarily be confirmed. So during onboarding and taking part in the study, we'll ask questions about exactly what the participants' experience is. But if you're experiencing long COVID, then really the criteria are and based in the UK. I think I mentioned that earlier, but at the moment we're just operating in the UK. We are in the future definitely thinking about whether we can expand the study more widely, but there are a number of I think great studies ongoing in a number of other countries, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to make sure that we're collaborating where we can. So we're securely sharing de-identified data with participant permission with many of the large consortiums that are working on this. So yes, that's the really simple. Visit our website, sanogenetics.com/study/gold, or if you just go to sanogenetics.com, it ought to be pretty clear how to get there from the top navigation bar. And if you are currently suffering or have in the past and you've recovered, then also the study is absolutely open to you.
Now, another thing, if people already sent DNA in the past who worked with you and have that DNA at your database, will they automatically be enrolled if they have long COVID, or they need to do that themselves?
Great question. They do need to consent to take part in this particular study, so people won't be automatically enrolled. But you're absolutely right. If they have uploaded a prior DNA test or done one of our tests, then you don't have to actually take a test again. We can simply repurpose the data, but you do need to consent to take part in the study.
I see. Thank you very much, Patrick, for this interview. It was really amazing to understand the genomics and to know that there are people who look into genes and relate that to long COVID. It's really vital that we understand the disease and find treatment options collaboratively. So thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you. And thanks so much for all the great work that you do at the foundation. Obviously, the community really appreciates everything you do. And, we're working as fast as we can. I'd love to be able to come back at some point and share some of the findings that we have when we get to the critical mass of participants. So thanks again for giving us the opportunity to talk about the study.
Thank you, and look forward to your findings in the future.